What is up, guys? Frosty Aussie 0232 here today for another Frosty Features. Today, we have our final member of the Alpha Flight team, but the OG member he is. Today, we are talking about Guardian. If you have not been to a Frosty Features, what this is a comic book background on the tunes that you use in Marvel Strike Force, and I am your guide to the pages with it. According to Scopely, this is the description given on the blog post about each character. They put these out for every character that comes to the game. This one's surprisingly short. We rate this at the end of the feature, so we will read it really quick. Guardian, originally James Hudson, is a Canadian engineer and inventor who designed a powerful exosuit initially intended for geological exploration. The suit is equipped with capabilities such as flight, energy projection, and force field generation. He donned the suit to become the Guardian and founded Alpha Flight in order to defend Canada and the world from threats. There it is. Alright, let's get into this a little bit. This is Guardian. Name, James McDonald Hudson. He doesn't sell French fries, but he'll fry your French villains. First appearance, X-Men number 109, 1977, where we get the introduction of the original Alpha Flight all at once. It's beautiful. Powers and abilities. Superhuman in every way. That means super strength, super speed, etc. Reflexes, artificial intelligence. Acoustokinesis. I put that on there. It's one of them for sure, but I put it on there because I wanted to see if I could say it on the thing, and I did. Flight, and many more. Essentially, like many other characters in the Marvel canon, we have a person that, let's say he just has his superpowered suit, and with the superpowered suit, he has many powers depending on the plot he is currently a part of, right? Aliases, Vindicator, Weapon Alpha, and Anti-Guard, and a few others. James Hudson goes through a few different versions, and there are a few different people who become the Guardian. When we had our poll situation, and it was between Vindicator, which was Heather McNeil, Heather Hudson, and Guardian, and we chose Guardian. Guardian's actually the first Vindicator, right? So that's something really important to look at, and there's a few points where James Hudson is gone and Heather steps into the role, so she also becomes the Guardian, what have you. But there was a bunch of people arguing about it as far as like MSF poll goes. It turns out all above are correct. Heather is Guardian, is Vindicator, and James is Guardian, is Vindicator. That's okay. They wear like the same freaking outfit, so it's chill. Affiliations. Alpha, Omega, and Gamma flights, and he has many deals with the X-Men, and will go many deals with the Avengers, right? That's sort of the thing about being Alpha Flight is essentially the Canadian X-Men team, but not all of them are mutants, Guardian being one of the characters that is not a mutant. Background, he is from London, Ontario, Canada, right? I actually had to Google to see if that was a real place. It is. They're known for their music and arts, right? So, London, Ontario, Canada, he's a Canadian. That's the beauty of Alpha Flight, is most of them are Canadian. Who died? Can't be a superhero, supervillain without somebody dying. In his case, his father died, but I had a really hard time linking that to him being who he is. So his father dies in a bar fight, and really in the comics, it doesn't seem like it actually affects him at all, but he does die, and that's a big deal. In the comics, one of the biggest things, Alpha Flight came out, supposed to be this big deal, like I said, it was the X-Men for the Canadians, what have you. In Alpha Flight number 12, only 12 issues into the Alpha Flight series, and overall, it's probably like the 16th or 17th issue that I'm aware of that James Hudson was in, he dies. And he dies for a pretty long time, right? So that's important to note, because when he comes back, a lot of the tech in his suit is integrated in his body, which doesn't change him effectively other than the fact that we know he's a cyborg. It brings up the coolest factor, because by then I think it was the 90s, and that's cool, right? So that's something important to consider. Steve Rogers, Reed Richards, Iron Man ripoff. So he's supposed to... So in the Canadian Marvel-verse, there's a whole bunch of Captain America ripoffs. Steve Rogers, right? There's a bunch. Captain Canuck, Major Maple Leaf, and then we've got Guardian. All of them are supposed to be Steve Rogers, but also we're also Reed Richards. We are hyper intelligent. We are leading. We're leading all this different research and stuff. We're funding other people's research things, and then also our experiments often are the reason why we have to fight things, right? That's Reed Richards. And then Iron Man ripoff, because he not only he's well off. He's not like Iron Man well off, but he got government's monies that he uses to pay for things. But also he originally, and as Scopely is presenting it, if we're keeping Scopely lore in mind, right? We're talking about Marvel 616 lore. If we keep Scopely lore in mind from what they presented us, he steps into a suit and uses it as Iron Man, even though that version of James Hudson died legitimately, like, I think it was like 1980, all right? Or very, very long time ago, maybe still even in the 70s, right? So something really important to keep in mind. He's a mix of Captain America, Mr. Fantastic, and Iron Man. He's in a weird, really odd way, right? He does still make an interesting character. He still has a lot to him, but there is a large gap in years in the comics where he's gone, right? Because he died. We'll talk about that. And then finally, Cousins first removed. So a very interesting thing about James Hudson is that he is the great nephew of Elizabeth Howlett, who is James Howlett's mother, right? James Howlett being Wolverine. So technically, James Hudson is the first cousin once removed from Wolverine, which is kind of a neat thing. Wolverine has close ties with Alpha Flight and is included in Alpha Flight for a very short period of time after he gets the adamantium put into his body. He's actually found by Guardian and brought into the team, and then he leaves the team. This is back when they were called the Flight, before Alpha Flight proper. He leaves the team, and then as Alpha Flight, they're trying to get him back. We talked about this across the future Sasquatch or North Star. This is all important information because a lot of people were mad because they're like, Wolverine's not even on Alpha Flight. Yeah, he kind of was. So, Sunfire, yeah, he kind of was. Yeah, watch Frost Future Sunfire. We talk about his time with Alpha Flight, right? So, these are why we do these videos, right? Good stuff. Moving on. Relationships. So, we've got quite a few. Since, another parallel that is often drawn, not only to the X-Men, but Fantastic Four. Alpha Flight is supposed to be a Fantastic Four as well, which is another reason why I went with the Reed Richards reference. Relationship, so he has a large relationship situation like a Reed Richards, right? So it's important to note. Heather Hudson McNeil, wife, when we did the poll, that's who we had as Vindicator. She shows up a lot, once again, has taken on the mantle of Guardian and a few other hero types in the past. Frederick Hudson II, his father that died in a bar fight. Truett and Victor Hudson are his brothers. To my knowledge, my Alpha Flight knowledge is there, but it's not as comprehensive as some of my other things. I don't think they show up that often, but I wanted to include it. Claire Hudson is his daughter. This has become more of a modern storyline for Alpha Flight. It heavily involves Claire Hudson. So that's something that we're going to be speaking about in notable events. So in notable events, we're going to start off with Canadian RoboCop. As I said, James Hudson dies and he comes back as a cyborg. Well, how does that happen? So, part of the struggles with Frosty Features, especially, this is number 95, y'all. So it's hard not to repeat certain stories. So a big story was about how essentially James Hudson becomes Guardian. And by becoming Weapon Alpha, he's working for an oil company, and he builds a suit. He steals the suit when he finds out it's going to be weaponized for America, and through that, he ends up getting involved with the government and becomes Weapon Alpha, eventually bringing together the Flight and Alpha Flight. That's the short version. Frosty Features North Star. I explained pretty much the general origin of the whole thing. It was really hard to avoid, especially with North Star not necessarily being, and from my perspective, not necessarily being as known as somebody like Vindicator or Guardian. Also, for full transparency, I'm gonna keep accidentally calling him Vindicator because that's how I know him. But all that to say, that's totally fine. So he becomes Canadian RoboCop. He, after stealing all the stuff, he very early on gets an enemy in Jaxon. Jaxon creates a anti-team called Omega Flight, and they clash with Alpha Flight, very much like the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. And Omega Flight even ends up joining the government, becoming good, being bad, almost like the Thunderbolts. Once again, we're making those extra parallels, right? There's a lot of them to be had with Alpha Flight. Very much like let's use the best of all these things and throw them into over here, which still makes for good comics, honestly. So, with Jaxon and Omega Flight, by the time, it's probably the second or third fight we see with them, like I said, Alpha Flight number 12, Omega Flight starts to overwhelm him, and as, I believe he was Guardian at this time, he might have just became Guardian. As Guardian is fighting Jaxon, he finally is able to defeat him, but in doing so, he pushes his armor to the limits, and he blows up. He dies on camera. Everybody sees it. It's like, oh no. And it was really, this position is like, hey, here's the new Marvel team. They're the main team for Canada. Check this out. Here's their leader. Look at him. 12 issues later, he blows up on panel. We all see it. And he's gone for like 15, 20 years. So he dies. But what actually happened, right? Beautiful, delicious retcons, is when his suit blew up, he was actually transported to Ganymede, which is one of Jupiter's moons, and he kind of appears there, and this alien race known as the Qurlin, Qrr, Qurlin, they find him, and they're essentially fish people. And they're like, you know what? That's a human, I'm pretty sure, because I'm a fish guy, and with high intelligence, of course. High tech, I'm a fish. That's a human. I heard through the grapevine, from all the communication we get from Earth all the time, right? Which could be a thing. I'm being sarcastic, but it could be a thing. From all of that, I've heard humans have been pretty successful in fighting off that Galactus fella, right? You know what? Let's get this human. He's in parts. He's in pieces. Let's put him together. Let's put it back together. Let's see what happens. And maybe we can have our own little human to fight off Galactus in the event that he comes. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Do you think that happens? Probably, right? So they're like, okay, well, I'm a fish, so I don't actually know how humans work. But there's these pieces and there's these pieces, and I'm pretty sure they just all go together. So in putting him back together, they kind of his suit's in pieces, he's in pieces. They reconstruct him with his suit as part of it, mistaking that was actually how his anatomy worked, right? So they made James into a cyborg. Once again, it didn't really, from my perspective, it didn't really change his power set other than making the suit be inside him, so he doesn't necessarily need the suit to do the thing. And also, so immediately after this too, when he finally gets back to Earth, there is a situation where his robot mind is overpowering his human mind, so he's very lifeless and pulled away, like Reed Richards. But Reed Richards doesn't have the cybernetic crap, but still, he's very lifeless and pulled away, and there's literally a point where Heather tries to get him reprogrammed so that his human mind takes over a little bit more. But with all of this, they make him, and lo and behold, guess who's coming? Galactus. And so he's together, and he's like, all right, we can fight Galactus. Let's get some people here. So they teleport Alpha Flight, most of Alpha Flight, and they teleport the Avengers to Ganymede, and they're like, hey, we're going to fight Galactus, and it's going to be great. And Galactus is like, it's not going to be great. What are you doing? And they're like, we're going to take you to another dimension, guy. And in this other dimension is where we will do our battle, guy, because you're going to lose all sorts of power. And Galactus is like, that doesn't sound like that great of an idea. So everybody gets sucked into a different dimension, right? Avengers, Alpha Flight, what have you. And they get there. In short, they do fight him and defeat him, but I'm going to phrase it like this. They get in this new dimension, and Galactus is like, great, I don't have much power. How do you all intend to get back? And all of them are like, we didn't think that far. I don't know how to get out of this dimension. And Galactus is like, we're going to need a lot more power than I've got, and you've got. Once again, they fight him, beat him, and then this conversation sort of happens in a less way. But ultimately, he's like, some of y'all are going to have to die for us to get out of here, like, for sure. Like, you're going to have to die. And so Heather, being the current Guardian and having one of these suits that James normally has, and then James, they're pretty much like, yeah, we'll sacrifice ourselves with the power from our suits that obviously has teleportation power, because why not? That's how we got, that's how James got here in the first place, got to that moon anyway. So they're like, we'll sacrifice ourselves, no problem. And Galactus is like, great, let's do this. Time to murk ourselves. And in doing so, James is like, you know what to solve this problem really well? Some good old spouse abuse. And he looks at Heather, and he's like, a karate chop, you're knocked out. And he pushes her to Alpha Flight, and he's like, get her home. I'm gonna do this alone. And then he sacrifices himself again so that they could go, and he ends up being lost. He's not dead. He's not in pieces anymore. He's unconscious, and he's lost in space. And then everybody gets to go home, and eventually this one fella who ends up being at the cornerstone of pretty much all of the Alpha Flight key moments, which is the Master of the World. As he's floating through the deep darkness of space, Master of the World comes upon him and takes him in and brainwashes him, makes him a part of Omega Flight, their greatest enemy, and then brings it back to Earth, sets them against Alpha Flight, which is how he gets back to Alpha Flight and back to being the leader at the helm of what's going on. So that's sort of how he becomes Canadian RoboCop. Anyway, that's how he gets back. That's how all that stuff kind of shakes out. So, here we go. Our next one is, I deemed it the craziest Dr. Phil story yet. Almost went with Jerry Springer on this. Shout out to my 90s babies. But it is a True North storyline because it's freaking wild. And it's right before Fall of X. That's the only reason why I wanted to do it. I hit my next button on the wrong computer. Here we are. So, with True North, what this is James and Heather have a baby. This baby's name is Claire Hudson. Claire Hudson becomes orphaned at a young age because, another fun fact about Alpha Flight as a whole, not let alone just James and Heather, they die all the time. But because it's comics, they get to come back to life. Perks, right? They got hella insurance and they get to live, right? So, because at a point, she's born, her parents die, so she becomes an orphan. That's what happens when your parents die. And then because she was a child, she gets put into an agency situation, and she gets foster parents who are just like far out cousins of Heather's. They're still the McNeil. They still have the same name, right? For clarity's sake, right? So Claire goes to live with McNeil's. Mom and Dad come back to life, and they're like, hey, because this is you know what you need in your comic books to make them solid. A good old custody case. Right? So they're alive, and they're like, yo, we should probably have our kid back because we're alive. And the Canadian government's like, yeah, that's not how that works. She belongs to these McNeils. And so a legal battle ensues. Because comics, right? Because comics, obviously. So a legal battle ensues, and the superheroes lose due to the fact that they live a dangerous lifestyle. They came back from being dead. And spoiler alert, they don't live all the way through what happens next. Anyway, well, not what happens next. They will die again, is what I'm saying. But, so they lose the custody battle, and they're like, dang, that sucks. And then Master of the World gets a hold of Heather, and it's like, you know, it'd be really freaking cool. So, for full context, this is how comic book this Dr. Phil moment gets, right? Master of the World, if you don't know who he is, Master of the World is a caveman that is immortal, that was abducted by aliens. Not in that order. Caveman abducted by aliens and then became immortal. So, alien, caveman, immortal guy gets a hold of Heather and is like, you know what? Let's brainwash you. You're gonna do some really heinous crap to discredit you forever. So, Heather goes and kills her cousins that are taking care of her daughter. Just kills them and steals the baby, eventually getting out of the control of a Master of the World. And so she's like, you know what I'm gonna do? The Canadian government's probably not very happy that I killed my cousins. That's a fault on mine because I shouldn't have been possessed in the first place. I wouldn't have killed him, but I did. So I'm gonna go run. Because the best thing to do in a situation where some messed up stuff happened is to run. So she takes her kid and she runs, right? Kidnaps a child, goes on the run. She's like, I'm gonna drive around Canada and it's gonna be amazing and no one's gonna catch us. And we're just going to live our lives as daughter and mother. And it's going to be great. And so they do this for years, but only to find out James was a part of the plot the whole time, right? Well, after the death of the cousins, he had nothing to do with that. So eventually, Heather and Claire are traveling around. And we're still in Dr. Phil, by the way. The episode of the Dr. Phil hasn't happened yet. So, they're traveling around, and some assassins attack. And these assassins are like, hey, we're here to kill you since you killed your cousins. So welcome to death. And she actually has her Guardian suit on, as you can see in the clip, in the little clip guy I put there. So she puts it on and she's fighting them off, but they're too strong. They got super strong weapons, what have you, and she becomes overpowered. And boom, James appears, and he's like, "I'll save you, my wife. I haven't seen you in a while, but here I am to save you. Happy days." And he takes care of these assassins quick, a little too quick, but he takes care of these assassins. And essentially, he's trying to regain the trust of Heather. He's trying to let her trust him. And all it turns out is that instead of her actually being on the run, more or less, as she kidnapped their daughter, James sort of kidnaps both of them and puts them in a VR reality that is sponsored by Department H, with the hopes that Heather would regain trust in him and regain trust in Department H, which is the Department of Superhumans for Canada. And he thinks this is all the best, and they're safe, and I'm watching over them. Nothing could be better than this. None of this can go wrong. So here's the first thing. Here's life lessons with Frosty, right? If you want to gain somebody's trust, don't lie to him immediately, right? Don't literally take entire spans of years and lie about it, right? It's not the move, right? So this makes her really mad. Yeah, this makes her really mad. So she breaks out and runs away with Claire into the Canadian wilderness. And this eventually leads to Fall of X, where the Alpha Flight are forced by the Canadian government to find mutant refugees, etc., etc. Pretty modern comics. This is sort of where we leave Alpha Flight, right? As without the Fall of X storyline, right? So there we are. Those are the notable events. Really interesting stuff there. All right, moving on. Power level. Marvel Strike Force doesn't care about power levels, but here on Frosty Features, we do know the way that this works. If you are a multiversal threat, that means you are a threat to not just your reality, but all realities, having the ability to topple the multiverse at your whim. Universal means you can probably end your reality and then hop on over to another one and take that one out, taking down the multiverse one strand at a time. Cosmic means on the low end you have power strong enough to take out something like a small planetary body, all the way up to things like solar systems or galaxies in a single feat or such. Nuclear means you have power equivalent to that of a nuclear bomb, leveling things like small cities or a planet with enough force. Super Soldier means that you are beyond all abilities of human capability, so you can take out things like brick walls up to a city block with enough strength, time, endurance, what have you. City means that you are similar to a human in every way, but trained to the absolute and utter peak of performance. This is where we see a lot of our mercenaries, our secret agents, our ninjas, things like that in the Marvel Universe. And then there's Greg. Greg is the undead Asgardian that's spawned by Hela in Marvel Strike Force, and left to his own devices, Greg's not worth anything, right? So, theoretically, I, the Frostiest of Aussies, being more or less a regular human being, and I am sitting in a library doing some research for a paper that I'm writing for some reason because I've become all scholarly and whatnot. I reach for a book, and at the same time, Greg decides that he's going to learn how to read, and he decides he's going to pick a random book off the shelf to do this. And both of us go for the same book at the same time. There's a tug-of-war ensues, and then it becomes a physical altercation because I live in the South, and people like to fight over books and whether or not to burn them. So, in this situation, Greg and I are in a physical altercation, and because I am equating, due to undead Asgardian physiology, just because it's fun for the sake of argument, Greg is equal to that of a regular human being, and Frosty Aussie could theoretically beat him, right? Ah! So, in the case of James Hudson, the Guardian, where do we see him? Well, he happens to have plot armor, even in the very limited scope of our current knowledge of Scopely lore, where all he has is a suit, which I got a feeling we're gonna see him in an event campaign where he talks about being a cyborg. Got a feeling. we are going to put him at nuclear. When you have a power suit that gives you plot armor and you can randomly do things like teleport by stopping space-time, or shoot giant energy projection missiles, or manipulate sound or light, or random feats of super strength or not super strength at the same time, you become very much set in a spot where you could probably just have a nuke in your situation, right? And we see that, especially being able to fight things like Galactus and people like that, these are easily cosmic feats. So even on the low end, depending on who's writing it, we're gonna say that the Guardian is set at a nuclear level. And then we come down to according to Scopely, this being the lore Scopely has placed that everybody wants to talk about, it's Scopely lore. So this is very short, and it actually doesn't make sense even as they post it, because Guardian originally James Hudson. So that means either the Guardian that we are getting in the game is not James Hudson, or he no longer has a name, right? He's just Guardian. That's not explained in these two sentences, so it's very hard to be able to draw a good amount of lore from it. And also, as we go on, we don't mention the cyborg thing. It's only 12 issues in. So I'm wondering if somebody just read one paragraph of a Wikipedia. So from the Frosty Aussie perspective, Scopely didn't even try. Didn't even bother to read the whole Wikipedia, right? Didn't even bother to scroll down or watch a history video. Didn't even bother to pick up a comic book. It's the hardest thing in the world for some people. And honestly, they've been doing pretty good as far as Alpha Flight's concerned. And the fact that it feels like Guardian is the one they decided to kind of shirk kind of blows my mind. But that is Frosty Features Guardian. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments your favorite Guardian moments or Alpha Flight moments, or if I got anything wrong, I'd love to hear from you. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this video here on YouTube. It doesn't cost you anything but a couple of clicks. And as always, my people, on Sundays at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time, I stream where you can see Frosty Features live. I hope that you all have a fantastic weekend. Most importantly, stay cool.